Christmas visitor. The snow fell quietly outside, blanketing the town in an eerie stillness. I had decided to spend Christmas Eve alone this year, a choice I was beginning to regret. The house, though cozy with its crackling fireplace and twinkling lights, felt oppressively silent. I sipped my spiked eggnog and watched the flames dance, trying to shake off the strange feeling crawling up my spine. It started around 9 p.m., a faint knock on the front door. It was soft, almost hesitant, like a child unsure if they were welcome. I froze, the glass in my hand suspended midair. Who could possibly be out on a night like this? I live on the edge of town, miles from any neighbor. Probably just the wind, I muttered to myself, though I wasn't convinced. Another knock, louder this time, persistent. I set my drink down and moved toward the door, my slippers brushing against the wooden floor. My heart thudded in my chest as I reached for the doorknob. Peeking through the peephole, I saw nothing but the empty porch and swirling snow beyond. "Hello?" I called, opening the door just a crack. The icy wind bit at my face. No answer. I glanced around but saw only my footprints leading to the door and no others. I shut it quickly, bolting the lock, and tried to laugh off my nerves. "Maybe it's a prank," I said to no one. But the unease wouldn't leave me. Around 11 p.m., the sound of shuffling came from the roof, directly above the living room. My breath hitched. I stared at the ceiling, every nerve on edge. It couldn't be Santa, I thought bitterly. The sound was too heavy, deliberate, like boots crunching over the shingles. I grabbed the fire poker and crept to the window, pulling back the curtain just enough to peek outside. The snow-covered lawn was pristine, undisturbed. No footprints, no sleigh, no reindeer. But as I looked up, a shadow darted past the edge of the roof. My blood ran cold. "Get a grip," I whispered, gripping the poker tighter. "It's probably an animal, a raccoon or something." The clock struck midnight, and the power went out. The room plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the dying embers in the fireplace. I fumbled for my phone, but as I clicked on the flashlight, a loud thud came from the kitchen. I nearly dropped the phone. Someone or something was in the house. "Who's there?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. The only response was the faint sound of bells jingling. Not the cheerful kind from A Christmas Carol. These were slow, deliberate, and sinister. I inched toward the kitchen, the fire poker trembling in my hand. The jingling grew louder, and then I saw it. A figure standing in the doorway. It was tall, its silhouette impossibly thin. It wore what looked like a Santa hat, but the edges were tattered, dripping with something dark and wet. The figure didn't move. It just stood there, staring at me with glowing red eyes that pierced through the darkness. My throat tightened, and my legs felt like lead. "What do you want?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. It tilted its head, and then it smiled. The grin stretched unnaturally wide, revealing rows of jagged yellow teeth. It raised a hand, long claws glinting in the faint light from my phone, mocked and pointed at me. I stumbled back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The bells jingled again as it stepped closer, its movements jerky, almost insect-like. I swung the fire poker wildly, but it was no use. The figure laughed, a guttural, rasping sound that made my skin crawl. Suddenly it lunged, and the phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. The last thing I saw before the screen went black was its face, grotesque, twisted, and unearthly. Now, I'm writing this by the faint glow of the embers, hoping someone finds it. The figure is still here, somewhere in the house. I can hear the bells closer now. If you're reading this, please don't spend Christmas alone. And whatever you do, don't answer the door. The Midnight Shopper. I never liked grocery shopping late at night, but Christmas Eve was different. The holiday rush had left the shelves barren, and I needed a few last-minute things. Eggs, milk, wrapping paper. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour store buzzed faintly as I parked in the nearly empty lot. Only 2 other cars sat in the vast sea of asphalt. Inside, the store was deathly quiet, save for the distant hum of the freezers. The usual holiday music was absent, replaced by an uncomfortable silence that felt wrong. I grabbed a cart and pushed it through the aisles, the wheels squeaking loudly in the stillness. As I turned into the dairy section, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A man, or at least I thought it was a man, was standing at the far end of the aisle. He was tall and thin, Wearing an oversized red coat that seemed too heavy for the store's temperature, his face was obscured by the brim of a Santa hat, tilted just low enough to hide his eyes. "Excuse me," I called, hoping he might move so I could grab my milk. He didn't respond, didn't even twitch. I swallowed hard and wheeled my cart closer, my heart thudding louder with each step. When I was about 10 feet away, he suddenly turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I exhaled shakily, telling myself I was just jumpy from the late hour. The rest of the store seemed deserted as I moved through the aisles. The shelves were half empty, and the only sound was the occasional beep of the scanner at the self-checkout station near the front. I saw no employees, no other shoppers, just me and him. He appeared again in the cereal aisle, standing perfectly still at the far end. His head was cocked to one side like he was studying me. This time, I noticed something strange about his coat. It wasn't red fabric. It was dark and glistening, as though it were soaked in something. "Hey, can I help you?" I asked, my voice trembling. Still no response. I backed my cart out of the aisle, keeping my eyes on him. When I turned the corner to leave, I heard the faintest sound, the jingling of bells. I froze. The sound wasn't coming from the store's speakers. It was coming from behind me. When I turned around, the man was gone. I scanned the aisles, gripping my cart so tightly my knuckles turned white. The store felt colder now, and the buzzing of the lights seemed louder, angrier. I decided to abandon the rest of my list and head for the checkout. As I approached the self-checkout stations, I saw him again. This time, he stood by the doors, blocking the exit. His face was still obscured, but his posture was different, more hunched, more predatory. The jingling bells grew louder, though I couldn't see where they were coming from. "Sir, I need to leave," I said, my voice shaky. He took a step forward, and that's when I saw his hands. They were pale, almost gray, with unnaturally long fingers tipped with blackened nails. His mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing jagged teeth. The bells chimed again, louder now, deafening. I realized they were coming from him. Panic surged through me. I bolted to the self-checkout, scanning my items as fast as I could, but the system froze. "Please wait for assistance," the screen chirped mockingly. I turned back to the doors. He was gone. The jingling started again, this time behind me. I whipped around, clutching my keys like a weapon, but no one was there. My breath came in ragged gasps as I abandoned my items and sprinted toward the exit. As I shoved the door open, I felt a cold, bony hand wrap around my wrist. I screamed, wrenching free, and stumbled into the icy night. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, throwing myself inside and locking the doors. I sat there, shaking, staring at the store entrance. The man or thing stood just inside, watching me. His grin widened, and he raised one hand to wave. In his other hand, he held a red-stained Santa hat. My hat. I don't remember driving home. All I know is that I haven't stepped foot in a grocery store since. And every Christmas Eve, I hear those bells, faint and far away, growing closer with each passing year. The guard at midnight. I've been a security guard at the old warehouse on the edge of town for years, but tonight felt different. It was Christmas Eve, and the usual quiet of the graveyard shift was accompanied by an odd tension in the air. The building was abandoned, save for a few boxes that no one bothered to move. I sat at the small security desk, the flickering monitor casting long shadows in the otherwise dark room. Outside, the snowstorm raged, the howling wind slamming against the walls. The streets were empty, the city asleep. Around 11:30 p.m., the radio crackled to life, breaking the silence. The voice on the other end was distorted, like it was coming from far away. "Guard, are you still there?" I frowned. It was a strange, hollow sound, almost as if the voice wasn't human. I pressed the button to respond, but before I could speak, the radio went silent again. I thought maybe it was a glitch or interference from the storm, but my gut told me something was off. I felt my heart beat a little faster. I glanced at the monitors. The cameras inside the building were clear, but there was something about the hallway footage that made my skin crawl. The shadows seemed too long, too dark, almost like they were moving. I shrugged it off in my imagination, the result of too much time spent in this empty place. I walked through the hallway to check the perimeter, my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The warehouse creaked with age, the floors groaning beneath my boots. The sound of my footsteps echoed eerily through the cavernous space. I reached the back storage area, where old machinery and forgotten boxes were piled high. That's when I heard it, a faint sound, like someone dragging something heavy across the floor. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound calm. My voice echoed back at me, but no answer came. I swept my flashlight across the rows of shelves, but saw nothing out of the ordinary. It must be the wind, I thought, as I turned to head back toward the security desk. Then I heard it again, this time closer. A slow, scraping sound. I froze. My heartbeat was deafening in my ears. The flashlight trembled in my hand as I swung it in the direction of the noise. The beam fell on an old wooden door at the end of the aisle. The door wasn't supposed to be open. It had been locked for years. I moved toward it cautiously, my breath shallow. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a small, forgotten room filled with dust and old furniture. But something wasn't right. In the center of the room, on the floor, was a red and white Santa suit. It was torn, blood-stained in places, as though it had been dragged through something dark. My pulse quickened, and I stepped back. That's when I saw something else, something that made my stomach churn. In the far corner of the room, a figure sat in a chair, hunched over. Its head was down, but I could see the flickering light from my flashlight reflecting off something wet on the floor beneath it. "Who's there?" I asked, my voice shaking. There was no response, just the soft sound of something breathing in the dark. I stepped closer, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Then, in a slow, deliberate movement, the figure raised its head. I nearly screamed. Its face was pale and twisted, features warped like melting wax. The eyes were wide open, black as coal, and its mouth hung open in a grotesque, frozen grin. It wore a Santa mask, but the mask wasn't a mask. The skin had fused with it, and the mouth, cracked and jagged, looked like it had been stretched into that eternal grin. The thing, if you could call it that, rose from the chair, moving with a jerky, unnatural motion. Its limbs were too long, too thin, and they scraped against the walls as it advanced toward me, dragging its bloodied hands across the floor. I stumbled back, my mind screaming to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The thing stopped just in front of me, its cold breath hitting my face. It leaned in close, and in a voice that sounded like nails on a chalkboard, it whispered, "You're on the naughty list." The last thing I remember is the feeling of ice-cold hands wrapping around my throat. Then, nothing. When I woke up, I was back at the security desk, but the clock said it was 4 a.m. I checked the monitors again, and the warehouse was as empty as it should have been. The cameras were fine, the doors locked, everything was normal, except for one thing. There, on the screen, in the shadows of the storage room, I saw a figure standing by the door. Its eyes were glowing faintly red. The thing was still here, and it was watching me. The Christmas break-in. I had always loved Christmas. The twinkling lights, the smell of gingerbread baking in the oven, the warmth of the fireplace crackling. But this Christmas was different. I was alone, my family miles away for the holidays. It was supposed to be peaceful, a quiet night spent watching holiday movies and sipping hot cocoa. Around 11 p.m., I settled on the couch with my blanket and a mug of steaming tea, the house lit only by the soft glow of the Christmas tree. The world outside was silent, blanketed in snow. I glanced at the clock. It was getting late, and the house was too quiet. Maybe it was just the loneliness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. My nerves were on edge, my heart thumping too loudly in my chest. Then I heard it, a soft scraping noise, just outside my front door. I froze, straining to listen. The scraping continued, like someone trying to slide something along the ground. My mind raced. Could it be an animal? But it didn't sound like that. This was deliberate, methodical. Someone was out there. I grabbed my phone, my fingers trembling as I quickly dialed 911. I didn't make it through the first ring. There was a loud bang, the sound of my front door smashing open. The phone slipped from my hand as I darted toward the kitchen, heart hammering in my chest. The intruder's heavy footsteps echoed down the hall, coming closer, closer. I grabbed a kitchen knife from the drawer, my mind racing for a plan. I couldn't make it to the back door in time. My best option was to hide. I slipped into the pantry, crouching low in the darkness, praying the intruder wouldn't hear me breathing. The door creaked open slowly, followed by the sound of footsteps stomping through the living room. The kitchen light flicked on, casting long shadows across the floor. "Hello?" a voice called out. It was low, rough, like it came from someone who didn't care if they were heard. I could hear the rustle of them rifling through my drawers, pulling out whatever they could find. My stomach twisted. Then I heard the unmistakable sound of my wallet being pulled from my purse, and I could feel my pulse quicken. I had to get out of there. The front door was no longer an option, and the back window was too far to reach. Suddenly, the intruder was right outside the pantry. I could hear his uneven breathing, slow and deliberate. "Don't make this harder than it has to be," he muttered, his voice coming closer. I held my breath, gripping the knife tighter. The footsteps stopped. I waited, counting each second. Then in a blur, the pantry door was ripped open, and I was face to face with him. He was tall, wearing a dark hoodie and a baseball cap that shadowed his face. His hands were covered with black gloves, his movements fast and aggressive. He didn't say anything. His eyes flicked to the knife in my hand, and for a moment there was hesitation in his gaze. But that didn't last long. With a swift motion, he grabbed my wrist and twisted, forcing the knife from my hand. My heart was in my throat as he pushed me backward. "Where's the cash?" he growled. I don't have much." I stammered, trying to control my breathing. My mind raced, looking for anything I could use to defend myself. He stepped closer, backing me into the corner, the sharp edge of a gun pressing against my ribs. I could feel the cold metal and hear the sound of my own breath. "Where's the money?" he demanded again. "I don't have much, just a few hundred in the drawer," I shouted, trying to keep my voice steady, my mind working quickly. He didn't care. The gun was still pressed against me, a constant reminder of the danger I was in. Suddenly, he yanked me forward, shoving me toward the living room. My head spun, and I stumbled to keep my balance. In that moment, the only thing I could think of was surviving. He shoved me to the couch and rummaged through the rest of the house, his steps growing louder. I could hear him flipping open drawers, searching every corner. The tension in the room was suffocating. Then in the distance, I heard the unmistakable sound of sirens. The intruder's eyes widened as the flashing lights began to glow through the windows, casting red and blue shadows across the walls. "Don't think you're getting away that easy," he growled, grabbing my wrist again. But before he could make another move, a loud bang came from the door, followed by the sound of multiple footsteps. The police had arrived. In a panic, the intruder bolted for the back door. The police burst in right behind him, chasing him down the hallway. I heard the shouts, the scuffle, and then silence. I didn't know how long I sat there, frozen in place, still hearing the faint ringing in my ears from the chaos. But soon, the police were in front of me, helping me up and checking to see if I was okay. My body was shaking, my heart still racing. The robber had managed to escape, but I wasn't sure what haunted me more, the way he had silently entered my home, or the realization that I had barely made it out alive. Christmas was supposed to be peaceful. Instead, it felt like a nightmare that I'd never forget.
I always loved spending Christmas at my grandparents' house. It was old and creaky, but it had this cozy charm you'd expect from a home filled with decades of holiday memories. This year, though, I was staying there alone. My grandparents were visiting family out of state, and I offered to house sit. The snowstorm hit around midnight on Christmas Eve. The wind howled, rattling the windows, and the old house groaned under the weight of the weather. I was curled up by the fireplace with some hot cocoa, trying to distract myself from the eerie stillness of the empty house. Then came the knock. It was faint at first, barely audible over the storm. 3 sharp raps on the front door. I froze. Who would be out in this weather? Another knock, louder this time. I hesitated, then grabbed my phone and crept to the door. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaky. No answer. I peeked through the peephole. The porch was empty, just a swirling haze of snow. Uneasy, I double-checked the locks and went back to the fire. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The knock came again, this time from the back door. My heart pounded as I slowly approached the kitchen. "Hello?" I called. Silence. I turned on the porch light and looked out the window. Nothing. Just the endless white of the storm. I locked the back door and decided to head upstairs, away from the doors and windows. I shut myself in the guest bedroom and tried to calm down, but the knocks followed me. This time, they were on the bedroom window. The house was 2 stories up. No one should have been able to reach that window. My hands trembled as I pulled back the curtain. A face stared back at me. It was pale, almost featureless, with hollow eyes that seemed to absorb the light. Its lips didn't move, but I swear I heard it whisper, "Let me in." I stumbled back, tripping over the rug. By the time I looked up again, the face was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The knocking continued, moving from door to window, as though it was searching for a way in. When morning came, the storm had passed, and everything was quiet. I finally worked up the courage to go outside. There were no footprints in the snow. Just a single message carved into the frost on the window, "Merry Christmas." Thank you for watching. Please like, comment, and subscribe for more stories. I will be posting at least 4 times a week. So if you like these, there will be more stories to help fuel your nightmares.